Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on today's webinar, Why Use a Cloud Managed Service Provider. I'm Edric, and I'm the marketing coordinator here at FuseForward. We have a lot to get through today, so we're just going to jump straight into things. I'd like to start by introducing you to our presenters. Today on our webinar, we have Mark Damm, our CEO here at FuseForward, with over 30 years experience implementing complex systems for large enterprises, along with extensive experience overseeing cloud migrations and operations. Also on the line is Jung, our solutions engineer. Ray has over 20 years experience in IT, including a background as a systems architect for enterprise software and big data solutions. Without further ado, I'd like to get started. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Today we're going to go and talk you through and share with you a bunch of information on how to manage and why use a cloud managed service provider. Things we're going to cover off is first, what is the difference between do-it-yourself and an MSP? Some of the key issues that you need to address, like regulatory compliance, complex security, business continuity, and then we'll end and just share with you a little bit of things that we're doing and what we're up to. First off, a little bit about FuseForward. FuseForward has been working in the IT space for over 25 years. We've been implementing complex IT systems in regulated industries like utilities, energy grids, water, wastewater treatment plants, etc. Right now, we are looking at how we actually help organizations migrate, maintain, and manage enterprise workloads in the cloud. We make complexity simple by automating IT systems and processes. As you can see, we are an AWS partner. We work with a number of security vendors, and we provide an all-in-one solution for your security needs. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges of moving to the cloud. Currently, today, the cloud is growing significantly. Worldwide cloud services is predicted to grow by 17%. And from our experience, we've been talking to US government, Canadian government, and of course the UK government. All of them are implementing a cloud-first strategy. What does this mean? It basically means that these organizations are looking at new IT workloads and they're saying, let's go and look at how we can use a cloud environment as its primary deployment mechanism. However, that creates a number of challenges. Challenges when we're migrating to a new technology platform like the cloud is the inherent project risk, i.e. when you're looking at something brand new, there's a lot of complexity in migrating to a new technology platform. You need new skills in-house. You need to meet all the security requirements for locking down those environments. You also have a lot of projects where you could be driving a new project and it could be very timely and costly to go and do something brand new if you haven't gone through the process of testing and validating the technology. What we're also going to share with you in some of our past experiences, you're looking at managing multiple vendors when you want to put a new solution together. Similar to the on-premise environment, but for example, in a security environment, there's over 70 vendors that you need to manage for a security solution. In the cloud, it's a very complex environment. So let's talk a little bit about how we can go through and why you might want to use a cloud managed service provider. So what we see is there's two ways of doing this. You can basically go in and try the cloud yourself. Do it all, try and learn all the different pieces. You can work with the systems integrator, which can do all the research for you. At the end of the day, it's like building a kit car. You get a lot of parts, you got to learn out what each part does, you got to manufacture it all, you got to figure out how to put it all together, you got to do your own designs and blueprints and everything else. Or you can use a cloud managed service provider. So let's talk a little bit about some of the differences and some of the things that a cloud MSP can actually bring to you. So if we're looking at a do-it-yourself, what does it usually take? Well, the timelines to do a project means that you have to go through a design phase, selection of the technology phase, and then a configuration and implementation phase. Minimum, that's 3 to 6 months worth of time just to go through and do all those steps in the process. With a cloud MSP, that's less than 2 months. Why? Because with a cloud MSP, we've already gone through the process of looking at all the different technology components. We've already gone through and developed the blueprints for deployment, and we maintain a staff of skilled resources. So let's look at some of the other challenges here. What about the ongoing and maintenance and updates required when you go through and take a new environment? So the cloud is basically infrastructure and applications. And if you're looking at the infrastructure, you have to start looking at the middleware layer as well as the application layer and look at all, not just the initial implementation, but also the ongoing maintenance and updates too. Things like the operating system, the middleware like WebSphere, like IIS, as well as any sort of additional components that you need in order to run the infrastructure. What does this also take? It requires you to have new hires, specialized staff to go through and train to actually make sure that your people are able to go through and not only use the cloud environment, but also have all that middleware and application skills as well. What does this create? High risk for projects due to all the technology changes. This was no different than when we migrated from mini computers from mainframe computers to mini computers to local area networks and microcomputers. It's a new wave, and we have to take our learning that we had from all those years before and apply it to the cloud as well. With an MSP, what do you get? You get a lower risk of the projects, because what we do is we look at basically looking at how the technology is already there. We test it beforehand and we create blueprints. We also go through, and in a cloud MSP, we'll also have an ongoing maintenance and update program in place, and we'll already have an economies of scale with a skilled team in place to go through and manage that environment. So those are just some of the key differences. Let's deep dive. Let's kind of look at a couple of the specific things that we want to be looking at. So some of the things that you want to look at when you're looking at a cloud MSP. 3 key steps that you need to consider in looking at who a managed service provider that you may want to work with has. 1, do they understand and are they compliant on the new regulations? 2, do they understand the complexity of the security related to running the cloud environments? It's not as simple as a physical data center that you can lock down yourself. A cloud environment has multiple threats environments in order for them to basically access and to basically lock down. And what about business continuity? Business continuity, how do you address things like making sure that you've got a disaster recovery plan in place? How do you make sure that all your backup and recovery mechanisms are tested? And let's look at these 3 areas in more detail. Let's first off start with regulatory compliance. Big one for most people in the regulated industries like government sector, utility accounts, financial services. But did you know that regulatory compliance hits even the smallest business? How is that? Let's look at some of the acts that are out there. I think most people have already been hearing the words GDPR. That is from the European Union, and it's all about protecting private data of individuals. Comparatively, we have PIPA, which is a Personal Information Act. We have the other one, which is the Electronic Data Records. We have personally identifiable information. We have HIPAA, which is all about health information. We have PCI, which is all about protecting credit card information. All of this is all linked into an individual. And when we start looking at how we want to secure this, every organization has a regulatory requirement to protect the personal information of their customers and the individuals that work for them. How do we do that? What are the implications of that? So some of the things that you start looking for in a managed service provider is their ISO certifications. Are they putting in place the proper processes and procedures to manage personal information, security information? SSAE 16 is another mechanism for validating the audit requirements for actually ensuring that the organizations that you work with have those levels of compliance. And of course, when we start looking at Sarbanes-Oxley, codename SOX, how do we go through and ensure that the public sector, the public companies out there have a requirement to ensure that their service providers also meet the requirements and they're keeping everything on side for a regulatory compliance issue. So this is a highly complex compliance requirement. So what happens if you don't meet compliance? So let's kind of look at some of this. We've got an example here. You get a security hack. I'm going to talk a little bit about Ashley Madison. It is a company that went through and it is a dating site. Interesting example. But what they were doing is they did not bolster their security or their data retention. And they got a massive hack where all of their customers' personal information was breached. And they were actually accessing all of the details of those individuals. So there was a hack. The cyber attack exposed 32 million users and their personal information such as addresses and credit cards. So what's the implication of that hack? Okay, hackers published all the data, And what happened? Well, Ashley Madison had a damaged reputation. We have other examples of that as well, but every time that you have a hack, the company's reputation is broadcast into the news and we have to go through. Why? Ashley Madison is no longer arousing customers. Oh, that's an interesting line. So as we get, it's a dating site. So what happens when you don't get there? Are you going to get more customers trusting that they're protecting your data? What about the third one? Well, convictions. Ashley Madison is slammed by the regulators and they're fined for basically breaching all of their security compliance requirements. They are fined upwards of $11.2 million for a data breach. That is small in comparison to the new rules under GDPR, which is upwards of a couple of percentage points of your top line revenue. And then, of course, you got the lost business and the damaged reputations. End of the affair for Ashley Madison, and the executive, the CEO, was out of his job. Now, that's only one comparison. So what do you get with the cloud MSP? An MSP will come to the market and provide you with experience and knowledge of the certification process. We'll look at how you can make sure that you're compliant with all of these different providers. And because the information and the teams are shared across multiple customers, they have the economies of scale to go through and maintain the ongoing certification programs that are required for the multiple jurisdictions in which they need to be met. Now, does that mean that the MSP does everything? No. It means that there's still a shared responsibility model between the organization, i.e. the customer, and the actual service provider and the cloud service provider. So it's a three-step process. Somebody like your infrastructure service provider like Amazon or Microsoft or Google provides one capability, which is the core infrastructure. But on top of that, you still have to secure your cloud environment down. That's part of the compliance requirements. And then, of course, the end customer, you're still responsible for the data inside those environments. So that's your security, that's the compliance requirement for regulatory compliance. What I'm going to do now is going to hand it over to Ray. Ray can talk to the other two and share a little bit on the details there.
Thanks, Mark. This topic I'm talking about now is complex security. And basically, security is not simple when you're starting to host your applications in the cloud. There are multiple ways to connect to the cloud, as well as your actually application being possibly connected to the internet. So next slide, please. So in regards to security requirements, what you really need to consider, like you should be running a security operations center because of the fact that you need to detect and prevent intrusions. In addition to that, you have to stay ahead of the security technology. Like there's a lot of hackers out there actually developing a lot of things to actually attack your application. So being on top of it and having a security operations center is actually helpful in regards to actually mitigating and detecting and preventing intrusions. So you also have to keep this going because ultimately the hackers just are not sitting around. They're basically keeping and developing new techniques and attacking things. As well, when you actually host your applications in the cloud infrastructure providers, they only give you the parts. So basically, what they'll introduce to you is a shared responsibility model. So what is this? And Mark talked about this earlier. Basically, the shared responsibility model is that they'll only shoulder responsibility of the cloud. So basically, everything that's in the cloud is actually your responsibility. So when you start looking at a cloud MSP can actually help you in regards to taking some of this responsibility of what's in the cloud and help with the shared responsibility model with you. And the quote here from the person from Cisco, companies can have up to 70 different security vendors. That's a lot of relationships that you have to upkeep. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about Target, for example. And basically, they had a lot of technologies in place. Basically, they had firewalls, access controls. But the thing is that they just didn't talk to each other. And if we delve into a bit more of what happened at Target, it actually started with an HVAC contractor. He was actually targeted with a phishing email, and basically his credentials were stolen. And then the hackers were actually able to gain access to the Target intranet. And then once in there, they were actually able to gain privileged user access. With this elevated user access, they were then able to actually trove their network. And they were undetected for up to 2 weeks, and basically they stole a lot of personal identifiable information. But then they also started looking at the credit cards, and since they were in there for 2 weeks being undetected, they were actually able to actually get to the point of sales and actually scrape a lot of the credit card information. As shown on this slide, 70 million people were actually affected. They didn't have, they basically followed the compliance where they have PCI, but the hackers were able to target their point of sale servers and actually scrape a lot of this data from the credit cards. The next slide, please. So when you look at a cloud MSP, and what you're looking at them doing is actually helping shoulder the responsibility that you would normally have. So as I was saying in regards to the shared responsibility model, they take a good chunk of that responsibility that you would normally have, and basically you would just be responsible for a lot of the data that you're actually putting in, because ultimately the MSP doesn't have control over the data that you're putting in the cloud, but they'll help you with the other pieces that actually are part of the cloud, such as the operating systems, as well as the other pieces that are part of the shared responsibility model. So like, for example, firewalls and perimeter security, intrusion detection and prevention, data encryption, as well as antivirus and DDoS. And really, most importantly, the privileged user management. So basically, as we talked about Target, a cloud MSP can actually look at the logs as well as the auditing of these privileged users. So basically, as a privileged user gains entry to the environment, it's logged and audited, but also it's restricted so that you're not getting what happened to Target because you have this privileged user management. Next slide, please. Next topic we're going to discuss is business continuity, and basically how your business can continue to run if in fact there is a disaster or some issue in your environment. Next slide, please. So what you should consider in regards to business continuity requirements. So as a bare minimum, you should be doing backups. So backing up your online data. So basically you're in a constant regime of where you're backing up daily as well as weekly, but keeping them somewhere such that in the event of a disaster, you can actually recover from that. But that's just as a bare bones. On top of that, you should also be looking at a highly available configuration such that if one of the issues, if there's an issue and it affects one of the components of your application can still continue to run and you can still continue with your business. In addition to that, multiple connectivity services. Being that all this is actually sitting in the cloud, you need these multiple accesses. Otherwise, you have a single point of failure. So if you lose your connectivity to the cloud, basically you lost all your applications. Basically, you can then have these backups and minimize the single points of failure. In addition to that, you should also look at, everything's fine and dandy if you have all these single points of failure covered. But you also need the operational recovery plans, which basically roll everything up and basically lay everything out in regards to when something does happen, you can then follow these plans and actually recover from it. And then ultimately the game day testing is where you're actually implementing these recovery plans just to see exactly how they work, and if there's any issues, you can then adjust your plans accordingly. Next slide, please. So what happens if business continuity is not implemented correctly? There are serious consequences. So the 911 emergency system was affected in several states in the United States. And basically, this service was out for 12 hours. So people's health and safety was at risk during this time frame. And ultimately, this is not business, this is health and security. And this is quite serious. During that time, the service was not accessible. So basically, they don't know exactly how many people actually were calling 911 for either fire or police or a health issue, but basically that's a big issue that we're looking at. In terms of retail, we can talk about Walmart in that on Black Friday, when they basically one of the largest retail days in the United States, their website crashed, and basically they had users trying to get to their site, but with their websites being down, there was a lot of unhappy customers, and their brand was actually tarnished because of the fact that a lot of these users were actually tweeting and going on social media and actually hurting their brand. So two different examples. One's quite serious because we're talking about health and safety, and the other is more retail and business. Next slide, please. What can a cloud MSP do for you? Well, they can ensure that when your application or applications are actually hosted in a cloud, they can ensure that it's highly available, such that if there is an issue with one of the components, then basically you can recover from that. So starting from the left, they can provide a hard and proven architecture with no single points of failure. So if we look back at the examples that I talked about in the earlier slide with 911, they basically had a single point of failure in that they only had one single line to their data center. Basically, they lost it. So if they would have had a backup line to the data center, basically they would have been fine. And basically lives would have been fine and not at risk. But because of the fact that they had a single point of failure, they were out for 12 hours. In addition to that, your cloud MSP should also provide regular monitoring and instant response. So basically, this goes hand in hand with the recovery plan. So basically, they can help you if there's an issue, walk through and recover from that issue. Moving along, we talked about the backups. So they should maintain a multi-data center backup service. So once again, limiting the single points of failure, having your backup in another data center. If there is an issue with that single data center, basically you can still recover because of the fact that your backup is located in another data center. And then wrapping it all up, actually simulating disaster and test failover services, basically the game day, which I discussed before, basically just simulating what happens in a disaster, such that if you lose a data center, for example, how can you recover and how quickly you can recover? And if there's any gaps in there, they can adjust the recovery plan and adjust accordingly. So basically a cloud MSP can basically do all these components and basically ensure that your applications can be highly available. Next slide, please. And how can we help? Mark's going to take over. So here you go, Mark.
Well, thank you, Ray. Hopefully everybody's kind of heard the three different things that we've heard here. So we've talked about regulatory compliance. We've talked about complex security environments. We've talked about business continuity. Three things that you want to consider when you're looking at a cloud MSP and you're looking for support in your journey towards migrating to the cloud. How can we help? So some of the things that we look at right now is this environment is a complicated, complex landscape. Many vendors are required in order to provide a piece of the solution, and how do you bring them all together? So we've got three different types of MSPs out there. You've got your traditional managed service providers. People out there, these organizations typically have been running and managing on-premise desktops, doing office support, and those kind of technology services. We've got an emerging cloud service provider that provides security and storage infrastructure and provides some of that infrastructure management capability that you need to run the core pieces of your plumbing. And then, of course, there's the application service providers who are typically out there providing services around managing your applications. Again, it's a complicated environment for multiple vendors. So what does Fuse Forward do? So we've kind of looked at it. You can see a blog post that we've described a little bit about solution as a service. If you look at what you need in order to manage your journey to the cloud and your cloud environment, it includes managing the infrastructure, managing the platform layers, and managing the software applications. And in some cases, those software applications may be third-party cloud environments, or they could be dedicated applications running in a private cloud of your own. What we do is we provide all of that as a fully managed service. We design, build, implement using our templated blueprints, a fully configured virtual private cloud for you. And then that becomes an environment to go through and manage all the platform services and manage your security compliance and all of your business continuity issues that you have. So what do? We've got over 10 years experience working in the cloud. By going through and working with us, we can help you maintain your costs, increase your time to value for using the cloud and decreasing your complexity in your IT infrastructure. We're we have our own ISO certifications, so we're security compliant. And then, of course, we've already gone through and continue to go through and stay ahead of the curve by looking at the best of breed technologies out there, determining which ones are required to meet the complex security requirements and the regulatory compliance issues that you have. So if you're looking for a partner, please consider us. If you'd like to go through and understand a little bit about where you are right now in the way of your cloud readiness, feel free also to click on the button below this screen, and we're happy to go through and engage with you and share with you a little bit about your cloud readiness.
With that in mind, thank you very much, Mark and Ray, for attending this webinar. And yes, our contact details are right here. Feel free to email us at sales@fuseforward.com if you're interested in our cloud readiness assessment or maybe a security assessment for your application. With that in mind, thank you very much for attending.